Son's command.
Well, happy Canada Day, everyone. Happy holiday to our neighbor to the north, a favorite destination of Bond Squad. As you can see behind us, the Bond Squad family is a family of hockey fans. We like to thank our neighbors for what we consider the greatest sport on earth, even though our Rangers let us down a little bit. It wasn't for a lack of trying, just a lack of scoring. And for those you don't know, today marks the July 1st, 1867 British North America Act, which gave Canada its independent dominion status. They become, I can't, my son's motorcycle. By the way, that motorcycle is, in fact, 45 years old that he's riding. It gave Canada at least its first steps towards its independence within the British Empire. So for that, we'd like to congratulate Canada. Great neighbor to the north, great place to visit, great sporting country, good economy, free markets, free people. And with that, we'll take this off. The Quebec Nordiques. Maybe they're going to get a team again. We hope they do, because Quebec and a few other Canadian cities, such as Hamilton, we believe deserve a team. All right. Before we start speaking about Greece and Puerto Rico and the jobs report, we posted something on the message board part of this broadcast, 2 charts. And for those of you who might be watching later on a replay, you know, we'll put them up on the screen the old-fashioned way. What these charts are charts, and we'll go in order here, of what the yield curve looked like at the beginning and at the end of a Fed tightening cycle. And as you can see here, we hope you can see, the steep yield curve, and this one is in June of '99, is what the yield curve looked like. And it's a little blurry, I think, on the screen here, but for that we apologize. When the Fed began tightening. The flatter line is what it looked like when the Fed ceased tightening. And as you can see, we started with a steep yield curve, but as we've been claiming, and no one on TV seems to want to acknowledge this, but it started steep and ended flat. Almost all your yield move was on the short end of the curve, not the long end. Now, the long end did move temporarily and then come back down, but tightening usually results in a flatter curve, with most of the interest rate move happening on the short end of the curve. This is not a unique circumstance in the late 90s. For if we fast forward to June of 04, the period of June of 04 to July of 06, that Fed tightening regime, remember Greenspan's conundrum, which we did not understand why he had a conundrum, because the same thing happens again. June of 04 is when the Fed started to raise the Fed funds rate. You had a steep curve. And in July of 06 is when the Fed ended tightening. And what happens? The yield curve got flatter, again, with almost all the rate move on the short end of the curve. This is logical, it is normal, and it is probably going to happen again. So all these yutzes on TV saying, wow, you know, the 10 years is at 240 and the Fed funds rate is essentially zero. So when the Fed goes to 2, the 10 years is going to be at 440. Doesn't work that way, pal. Doesn't work that way. Probably won't work that way again. Could we see the long end spike a bit? Yeah. If the Fed is too slow to tighten and inflation pressures build, the curve could steepen further. The Fed usually never, with the exception of the late 70s when the Fed kind of lost control of things, they will catch up, flatten the curve, and most of the move in rates will be on the short end of the curve. So what do we think? Well, we think maybe you get 50, 60, 70 basis points at the most on the long end of the curve over time and temporarily, but we could see 200-300 basis point move on the short end of the curve. So that compresses net interest margins, disincentivizes lending. So if you think the banks are going to do well because of a Fed tightening, the banks do well when the economy is strong enough that it warrants a Fed tightening. All right. Look at the economic data we've been having. Every day we've been writing, the economic data is mixed but generally good. And we saw that again today. We had ADP employment data, which indicated the private sector added 237,000 jobs in the month of June. That's the strongest print for ADP this year. Compared to last year, it's just okay, but it's the strongest print. And that at least shows that the economy bounced back from the depths of a very poor Q1. But if you look at the data, it's back to where it's been trending. There's no makeup for what we lost in Q1. And we can see that again in the ISM manufacturing number. We had 53.5 for ISM, U.S. manufacturing. Now that's good. Any print over 50 is expansion. It was the best number of this year, best manufacturing number of this year. However, it is below every single monthly ISM report for 2014, with the exception of January of 14, the hard winter. So we've not even come back to trend of last year, never mind building on that. So where do we go the rest of the year? We probably go back to where we trended most of last year. The Q2 of last year was a snapback from a poor winter. We had Q3 was maybe a little too much optimism on the part of businesses building too much in the way of inventories. Now we're bleeding them off. We probably have a small inventory increase going into the holidays. We could print somewhere between 2 and 2.5 for Q2, about 1 to 1.5 for the first half. We print probably somewhere between 2.7 and 3.5 for the second half. Combined, we're back in the low to mid twos, and that's all she wrote. And we have a reason for this outlook, and it comes none other from one of the more bullish economists out there, Moody's Analytics' Mark Zandi. And Zandi, by the way, is very much on top of things. And today, following the ADP report, remember Moody's Analytics does the ADP data, Mr. Zandi says the 237,000 jobs that were added in June, according to ADP, is roughly twice the pace of the expansion of the working age population in the U.S. That would be good news. Think about it. Excuse me. Think about that. You're creating jobs twice the pace that adults are coming into adults are becoming working age, people becoming working age. There's a caveat to this. About 10 or 15 years ago, 237,000 wasn't twice the working age population growth. It was replacement. It was equal to, roughly, the working age population growth. Okay? That presents a problem if you're looking for outsized growth, consumption-based growth. Because if you are adding adult consumers to the economy at half the pace of 10 or 15 years ago, then your organic increase in consumption is roughly half of what it was. But we'll concede that because of lower inflation, efficiencies and whatnot, maybe consumption can grow at 2/3 the speed it did before. And that makes us think we're maybe in a 2/3 economy, where everything now happens about 2/3 of what it did through much of the post-World War II era, the 60-odd years since then. And if you look at the data, it kind of makes sense. Well, where are we on inflation? Well, if we take out the volatile food and energy. Remember, energy prices year over year make that number look lower than what it really is to the broader economy. We're about 1.2, 1.3 on PCE. We're about 1.7 on core CPI. Well, that's the Fed wants to be at 2%. Well, if you average PCE and CPI, you're probably 2/3 of what the Fed wants to see. Okay, what about wage growth? Well, the Fed, in an expansion, especially in the most robust part of an expansion, wants to see wage growth around 3 to 3.5. We've been printing between 2 and 2.3. What do you know? About 2/3 of what we used to see. So it's all adding up here. So we have 2/3 the consumption, consumption-based growth. We have 2/3 the normal inflation rate. We have 2/3 GDP. Oh, wait, we didn't say that yet. I'm sorry, we should have said 2/3 wage growth. All right. We also have 2/3 GDP. The U.S. economy would grow between 3 and 3.5, sometimes even 4 when the Fed was really accommodative, or even 5 on some rare occasions. Well, where's it growing now? Well, in the recovery, it's averaging about 2.2, 2.3, off the top of my bald head. All right, roughly 2/3 of what we used to see. All right, so when do we go back to normal? This is probably normal. Normal is what conditions dictate, okay? When you look at fiscal policy, monetary policy, demographics, globalization, technology, it might be that 2.5 to 3 is the new 3 to 3.5, and it takes lower rates than in the past, maybe not zero interest rates, but lower interest rates than in the past to generate that. Now, we think rates are too low. The Fed is punishing a whole group of potential consumers, the retirees and those who are near retirement who rely on income, investment income, that is, for their purchasing power. But maybe 2 or 2.5 is optimal on the Fed funds rate going forward. All right, that means we might get, as we said many times before, we might get a flat curve in the 2.5 to 3.5 area. All right, that could very well happen. So be careful about thinking that we have far to go. We might be later in the business cycle than we think. And if you look at the Chicago Purchasing Managers Report and the ISM Milwaukee and a few other economic reports recently, it looks like, although consumer confidence, which topped 100, 101.4 yesterday, looks like it's getting to peak or even the beginning of late cycle. Usually 120 on consumer confidence is roughly late cycle. We have the business end of it, profit margins, financing, output is starting to go. Looks decidedly late cycle. So we might have this disconnect where the Fed pulled forward the business cycle and the consumer's just catching up now, but the business end is going down the other slope, which means that when the Fed comes in and tightens, it probably doesn't have to tighten very much. Use logic. The later in a business cycle that the Fed starts tightening, the less it has to tighten, because the business cycle is taking care of that itself. Now, usually, if the Fed was this low this long, we have inflation running out the door, but we don't have that now for the reasons I've already stated. So, as Rick Santelli on CNBC has said several times, and we agree, if the Fed wanted to tighten, it probably should have tightened last year. We said that last year the Fed should probably tighten now, if only to smack back investors who are reaching for yield. Not that it's all their fault. The Fed has actually pushed them to do that, but still, to rein everything in. Now it has to do that when China's economy the cracks are getting deeper, that there is an equity bubble there. They're financing stock purchases with loans at 22% interest rates. Come on, guys. No bubble. That economy really needs to be rebuilt. A lot of potential, right? But it's built on a very rickety frame. You have a lot of power mounted to a very rickety frame. So that has to be taken care of. Europe, Japan is a demographic story, and the demographics aren't good. So we have slowing to stabilizing growth overseas. We're late in the business cycle here. We don't see a recession, but we think that the pace of growth, the pace of equity gains, the pace of risk asset gains has kind of peaked. So this is why we're not believers in a bond bubble in the Treasury market. Could we see 3% on the 10-year? Possibly. We think we come up and then we finish the year right around where we are now. Our year-end forecast is 240. Hey, our end of Q2 forecast was 235, and we closed yesterday exactly on the end of Q2 at 2.353 on the 10-year. So, we had that right. Maybe the broken clock is right twice a year. So we don't think it's a whole lot going on there. But Europe is another story, and you can see the Greece has come to a crisis stage now. And every time we see something positive come out of a positive tone out of the Greek government, the market likes to rally. The power to solve the Greek problem is not in Greece's hands right now, per se. It is up to the Troika. The Troika is the ECB, the IMF, and the European Commission, with Germany as the loudest voice in the European Commission, which is a group of the sovereign states. All right. They, in our opinion, have not always instituted the correct type of requirements for Greece. At the same time, the Greeks, for the most part, have done little to show that they want to make any meaningful changes. So no one has really behaved as well as they could. But we think that the Troika is more right than the Greek government is. And excuse us here. Got to fix that on the screen over there I'm looking at. We try to multitask around here. And there's no way they could sustain growth, to sustain the economy even, with the current system. Retirement at 50. Here's a good story from Greece. The retirement age for hairdressers, remember, there's retirement age for private jobs over there and government pensions for private workers. Tell me that's not a little screwy. But the retirement age for hairdressers is 50 because the government actuaries figure that they're working with chemicals as hairdressers and stylists, so their lifespan will be shorter, so they should get to retire sooner. All right, but what about the customers? They're getting the chemicals right into their head, right? It's crazy. It makes no sense. So Cyprus plays, and we called this, we wrote this and we said it on the air. Alexis Tsipras, the Greek prime minister, does his Dick Fold imitation. He keeps holding out for a better deal. And he overplayed his hand. And how he did that was by calling for a referendum. He calls for a referendum to have the Greek people vote to whether or not accept the bailout, thinking that, and at least publicly he's thinking this, and he's advising voters to vote no. He thinks that a no vote would give the Greeks a stronger position. See, the people don't want it. I have no mandate to agree to this. Come to our side. The Troika has told the Greek people, if you vote no, it's tantamount to a vote no to belong to the EMU, the European Monetary Union. Mr. Tsipras is saying, no, that's not what we mean. Well, it doesn't matter what you mean. It matters how the people who are holding the cash that you need, it matters what they think. So, the Greek people have an interesting and important choice to make this Sunday. Now, we think they'll vote yes on this, and that a deal will eventually get done. That reforms the Greek economy to some extent, but not necessarily with the Tsipras/Syriza party government. Maybe the Syriza party government, but not Mr. Tsipras himself. He was elected on not agreeing to those things. Now, Greece could leave, and it'd be painful for them. Maybe eventually they can devalue their way out of their problems. But it might not be as painful economically to the European Union and the EMU as some people claim it to be. There's a popular theory out there, it's not totally incorrect, that if Greece leaves the EMU, the euro will strengthen. And if the stronger euro hurts German exports. That's true. But it forgets two important factors. One, the ECB, under the direction of the European Commission, the sovereign central banks, could print money, devalue the currency a bit, more QE, and bring the value of the euro back down without Greece in there. Secondly, look where the euro is, between 111 and 112, US dollars. it was over 140 at one point, right? So what if the euro went from 111 to 120? It still doesn't kill German exports. And remember, there's an opinion that's prevalent in the FX markets that the ECB and European officials really want the euro at parity with the dollar. All right, if that happens, what happens to interest rates? All interest rates, especially on the long end, come down, and it also limits what the Fed can do. But the Europeans can do this with or without Greece, and it's very important that they play hardball with Greece. Greece, even if it leaves, even if it causes turmoil, even if it damages the eurozone's credibility, in the grand scheme of things, it's a speed bump. But what if Spain did it? And Spain has the Podemos party, which is like Syriza, very far left. And if the European troika caved and gave Greece what it wanted, mostly what it wanted, with very little in the way of reforms, then a larger economy, a much larger economy like Spain wants similar deals. They stop reforms, and they want assistance when their economy blows up because they didn't reform, and Germany has to foot that bill. Germans don't want that. Neither the Dutch, the Austrians, the Finns, the other really solid economies. Never mind the French, who deal with their own periphery-like problem. But then, as bad as Spain would be, in Spain, by the way, if Spain did that, and they didn't, and they played a game of chicken, and they didn't get bailed out, and they left, the euro went back to the peseta. Well, then the bonds that, by the way, sit on bank balance sheets throughout Europe, not just at the ECB and in sovereign central banks, could be redenominated in pesetas. So it could be a 1-for-1. So you have €1, you get 1 peseta, but the peseta might be worth 60 cents on the euro, right? 60 cents what the euro was worth. So you just lose 40% of the value of your holding in the Spanish sovereign. Now that happens to the banks. It puts the banks in a tough spot because these are regular money center commercial banks, and they have counterparty agreements with banks all around the world. So that contagion swings around the globe, including to the U.S. So nobody wants that to happen. And then if that did happen, what about Italy? Let's say they gave Spain what they wanted, and they bailed them out, and they ate crow and said, all right, here you go. Here's your bailout, no reforms. Then Italy threatens. Italy is what, the 7th largest economy in the world, but they have the 4th largest amount of sovereign debt. And they have, and I might be wrong on this, but I know at one time in the not too distant past, they had the most debt per GDP of any developed country. You let Italy leave the euro, or put Italy in a situation where they can play chicken and demand assistance without making reforms, the eurozone is done. So basically, Greece is being held out as an example by the troika, and it's almost like what they used to do to prisoners in World War II. Not our side, the other side. They wanted to set an example to show that they weren't messing around. So they pull a prisoner out of line and shoot him, and then they'd say, "See, this is what happens. We're not joking." Well, that's what they're doing in Greece. They're shooting Greece and letting the rest of the periphery know that don't try this. So we think that Greece gets worked out in that they agree to all or most of the reforms. It's a painful process for Greece. Greece is still a drag on the European economy. The European economy is on a major drag from, look, it's not like Greece is the only country that has uncompetitive labor and business laws. Just go throughout most of Europe and you get that. They're just the worst. And you don't have exactly great demographics for growth. So Europe, the Eurozone, even with mammoth QE, we'd be shocked if they can print 2 consecutive quarters over 2% anytime soon. They're over 1. They're probably going to get over 2 in Q2. Can they do a Q2 and Q3? That's going to be tough, but we'll see. But they're going to be in a permanent, secular, lower growth environment for probably decades. And remember, they're going almost 1-to-1 soon in some countries, retirees to, and that'll happen in the next decade or two, retirees to benefit recipients. Not good math. And Japan is another story. So we don't see a whole lot of upward pressure on rates, thanks to Europe and to a lesser extent Japan. And if the Eurozone and ECB want parity between the dollar and the euro, that's going to send money back into the U.S., and that's going to help hold down long-term rates if that does happen. So we're not that sanguine on Europe. We think Europe's the sick man of the developed world. It has to be for now, and we think that there's going to be a cap on rates. Enjoy your 240s, maybe get to 250. We could see 260, before long. But don't think that Fed tightening is going to push it up. Fed tightening can actually push things back down eventually. So, and the last thing we'd like to cover is Puerto Rico. We were a little surprised with the frankness of Puerto Rico Governor Padilla the other day when he told the New York Times, and then again said in a speech on a press conference, I guess is what it was, or an address, that its debt is not payable. It's not, they can't pay the debt. Took the legislature by surprise, took the markets by surprise that the situation was that dire this soon. And we believe that was done for effect. He wanted to light a fire under the legislature to pass a budget, under bondholders to maybe work out a voluntary restructuring at some point. He needs to get something done there. And unlike Mr. Tsipras in Greece, he does want to fix the economy, and he does want to roll back some of the anti-competitive and anti-growth fiscal policies. The question is, can he do that without forcing a debt restructuring? We're doubtful, even on Puerto Rico GOs. The math doesn't work. And as Mr. Padilla says, it's not politics, it's math. And they shot themselves in the foot. The first thing wasn't their fault. U.S. military after the Cold War pulls out. Although, the Puerto Rican populace was not in favor of the Navy using the island of Vieques as a target range, but the military withdrew resources out of there. The second, and this is something Puerto Rico could have controlled, in 2006, a lot of the tax benefits to pharmaceutical companies expired, and they let them expire, and these companies left. A lot of them probably inverted, to Ireland and such, or merged with companies domiciled in Ireland. They're not coming back, so they lost their tax. They lost their tax base in that these people lost their jobs. So they were penny wise and pound foolish. They said, no, we're going to let the taxes rise on the corporations. Corporation left, people lost their jobs. They stopped paying taxes because they're not making any money, and they become benefit recipients. Politicians don't figure this out. It's pretty simple to me, but they couldn't figure it out. So they kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, waiting for something else to happen. They did nothing to make anything productive happen. So now Puerto Rico is in a bad spot. Insured bonds probably get paid in full. Uninsured, we think at some point get worked out at less than par. They made the payments today on the GO debt. The PREPA bonds, they're negotiating a restructuring. They got an extension of the forbearance on those bonds till September. We have PRESA and PRETA, the sewer and the highway bonds. We think the COFINAs are safe for now. They can't call those back. Those are paid with sales tax. There seems to be enough revenue to pay that. But Puerto Rico is a lesson in what can happen at some point to a state if it doesn't manage its finances properly. Unlimited taxing power doesn't help if you destroy your tax base. Then you can raise taxes on nothing, basically, on a smaller resource pool of potential taxpayers. So this is a good case study for us. But if you're not sure if you own Puerto Rico paper, if you own bond funds, go check that out, because there are some funds that are loaded. And what we didn't do, and we should have done this at the beginning, and I know one of my partners would be upset with us, we forgot the disclaimer at the beginning, so we'll do the disclaimer now. I don't think compliance will be that upset with us because we have the disclaimer. This broadcast is brought to you by Wealth Strategies and Management and Bond Squad. Wealth Strategies and Management and Bond Squad are separate entities from Private Advisor Group, which is it was a financial, a registered investment advisor, and our registered investment advisor. And all opinions voiced on this broadcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any, and we repeat, any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. So that means the charts we showed you, even though it happened the last two tightening cycles, and it happened other tightening cycles too, does not mean it will repeat again. However, it also does not mean that the curve will move in a parallel fashion when the Fed tightens, because it very rarely does. We would not put our money on that bet. So that's all we have this evening. Sorry about my voice. I'm starting to lose it again. Any questions, call us during market hours, 570-424-1555. And email me if you need to, thomas.byrne, that's thomas.byrne at WS, that's Whiskey Sierra, the word and M as in Mike.com, thomas.byrne at WSNM.com. And with that, have a great night. Happy Canada Day, everyone. Hockey season's only, 3 months away now. See, we just had the Stanley Cup, and hockey season's almost upon us already. And unfortunately, so will fall and winter. And that's all we have. Good night, and have a happy 4th of July for all us Americans out there. You know, we got our independence first, so we have that on you, Canada. Good night.